right, so we're going to get into this book, continuing with the topic we had in the last video and with the same author, Jack D. Forbes. It says here, name of the book, The American Discovery of Europe. We go to the introduction of the book real quick. It says here, picture giant turtles from the Caribbean following the Gulf Stream to the coast of Cornwall and other parts of Europe, diving occasionally to feed upon jellyfish as they make their epic journeys. Picture also ancient American mariners, perhaps from the Caribbean or the east coast of North America, also following the Gulf Stream in dugout boats, large and small, reaching places as diverse as Ireland, Holland, and Iberia. Now, really think about what they're telling you here. All right, this is from recorded primary sources that Jack Forbes has gotten this. We've seen the footnotes in his books and the primary sources he uses for the topics he discusses in his books. And again, so we got Native Americans, right? So-called Native American Indians who are, indigenous people of America, are building these boats or carving these dugout large canoes. I mean, they needed pretty large trees and they had them here in America. We do know that. And heading over to Ireland, Holland, and Iberia. Now listen to that. Where did the Phoenicians go? Iberia, right? The Phoenicians settled Iberia. Where's the Phoenicians coming from? Canaan. And now the Black Irish. Where did the Black Irish come from? Could some of them been coming from ancient America before they ended up in Ireland? The Scottish Highlanders. There's direct streams from Jamaica right into Scotland and Ireland. We read in the previous video. We're going to read that again today, as it's saying here. Going to all these places such as Ireland, Holland, and Iberia, right? The Iberian Peninsula, where Sephardic and Moorish people are, right? Visualize the surprise of Christopher Columbus when he actually met two such Americans, a man and a woman, right? This is recorded. Christopher Columbus met Indians in Galway, Ireland, some 15 years before making his famous voyage of 1492. Okay? He met American Indians. He wasn't lost. He didn't know he was in India. He knew where he was going. He didn't call them Indians because he thought he was in Hindustan or Bharat. That's not the real story. India superior, the farthest east, America, has always been India superior. The three Indias, medieval times, where people of the tropics lived, people of dark complexion, the land of Prester John. Continuing, says, the story of ancient Americans as seafarers, mariners, and navigators is for me a fascinating, although often overlooked aspect of history. It's overlooked. They never taught us this in school. Evidence presented here will show that American Indians were builders of great boats, all right, ships, up to almost 100 feet in length in the Caribbean. All right, people in the Caribbean were doing that. The Arawaks, the Caribs, Lucayan people, all sorts of people, and were outstanding students of the ocean's currents. They knew the currents, storms, the winds, and resources. They could survive in the open sea. Where were the Danites? Who were the Danites? Future video, the Danites. It's going to be a very great series I got coming. Haven't even started recording or editing, but I just know I got it in my mind. We've been doing the research for a while. I've been learning from other brothers, the info they put out. All right, the Danites were seafaring people. A lot of the Phoenicians were Danites. They just got grouped as Phoenicians. Outstanding students of the ocean's currents. The epic story of American seafaring includes maritime cultures of northeastern North America, fishing at sea for challenge and prey such as swordfish, developing advanced toggling harpoons as early as 7,500 years ago, and evolving the red earth culture that may have spread as far as Europe. The red earth people, remember my video, they're saying red earth here. My video, the red paint people, the red earth or the red paint people. Check out that video I've done already. These people were seafarers all over Europe and other parts of the world, and they had a base here, found out near Nova Scotia up there in Canada. The story of ancient seafaring also includes the daring voyages of Eskimo Inuit groups from Greenland and Labrador, using ingeniously designed kayaks and larger umiaks, voyages that took them along the coast of Greenland, sometimes passing underneath huge ice mountains, arching over the coastline and always facing terrible obstacles from storms and drifting ice. Unbelievably, perhaps, intrepid Inuit kayakers show up in the waters of England, Scotland, and elsewhere, whether arriving directly from America or escaping from European whaling vessels. Along the coast of South America, too, our story includes seafaring by nations such as the Caribs and Tupi Guarani, okay? With large dugouts of their own and with ocean rafts also being utilized. And our story would be incomplete without reference to the impressive freight rafts used along the Pacific coast and their counterparts in the Caribbean and Atlantic. Sails were often used both on rafts and in canoes and pirogues or piraguas. Early sails seem to have been made of palm, matting, or other fibrous material on Lake Titicaca, all right? Lake Titicaca, fixed to a pole mast with tough cordon made from plant fibers. Foreign visitors were incredibly impressed with American maritime ability and technology, whether in the waters of Greenland in the north or south to the Caribbean or in South America. In the latter areas, huge trees were durable wood. All right, huge trees with durable wood. Listen, this is in America. Made it possible to manufacture boats of incredible size and flexibility. All right, ancient boats, all these ships, Noah's Ark, all that was from here, the real Lebanon. Here, America, we had these huge trees with durable wood. All right, good quality cedars, which made it possible again to manufacture boats of incredible size and flexibility. Boats whose finished width was far greater than that of the original tree, since gradual pressure carefully applied allowed the hull to be expanded outward. Similarly, planking was often used to increase the height of the vessels. The Spaniards counted up to almost 100 oarsmen in some vessels and remarked upon the protection given to the boats when beached by means of onshore shelters, especially erected for that purpose. We can assume, I believe, that boat building of that type extended back many centuries or even millennia. In the far north also, it would appear that watercraft were being manufactured several thousands of years ago. Thus, there is a long time period available for voyages both within American waters as well as across the Atlantic. Our story also includes an examination of ancient migrations, theories of human origins, and evidence relating to the beginnings of human life in the American hemisphere. All right? All right? Evidence relating to the beginnings of human life, the origin of human life, and in the American hemisphere. America, the true old world, we've been saying that. These fascinating topics must be dealt with in part because some scholars have argued for a great antiquity for Homo sapiens, modern humans, in America. All right, we've done the research. We know about the Guadalupe man, the Calavera skull. All right, we know about all that stuff they've been finding here. All right, Homo sapiens, modern humans in America, and even that migrations took place to Europe from America tens of thousands of years ago, okay? From America to Europe. We've been going over there. We colonized a lot of Europe. Since our topic is the American discovery of Europe, we are compelled to look at such theories. However unpopular they may be in current anthropological circles. In telling the story of American travel, one must touch also upon the activities of Europeans, since such activities often result in Native Americans arriving in Europe, usually as captives, but sometimes as ambassadors, guests, entertainers, and curious visitors. In this connection, our story includes evidence relating to possible Norse activity in carrying at least some Americans to Europe up to 5 centuries before 1492. Possible action contexts from Europe are also examined, such as alleged Solutrean period spear point markers crossing the Atlantic in the Pleistocene, as well as later Romani, the Roman people, people of the Promised Land, Irish, and other possible visitors from east to west. They're seeing it in reverse, I would say. The spread of plants from one region to another has also been considered possible evidence of early intercontinental contacts. The story of America's acquisition of many plants of possible Southeast Asian or African origin is beyond the scope of this work, but references will be made to the movement of flora and foods from America to Europe and the Mediterranean, right? We feed the world. One of the great mysteries of North Atlantic has been the question of what happened to the Norse colonies in Greenland. The European settlers seem to have disappeared between the 1400s and 1700s, and several theories have been developed to attempt an explanation, including climatic deterioration, cultural stagnation, and pirate raids. Our story will shed light upon the dramatic disappearances of the Norse, showing that some became Americanized, intermixing with Inuits and Botok people of Newfoundland, the Botok. These same Botok were eventually taken to Cape Verde by the Portuguese, Sephardic Jews, and Moors. All right? But with a number of their descendants ending their lives as slaves in Europe and even South America. After 1492, the majority of Americans arriving in Europe, the Canary Islands, and the Mediterranean came as captives. In spite of some records that shed light upon their existence in cities such as Sevilla and Valencia, we actually know very little of their fate. They must have had a decided genetic impact upon the populations of Iberia, and doubtless many were sold by the Portuguese, especially to other parts of Europe. All right, American Indians being sold into slavery into Europe. We saw that, we read this a lot before. We got many primary source accounts of this. We know also that some reached North Africa as well as West Africa. Okay, we know it went in reverse. In Britain, what as yet little is known about possible Portuguese and Spanish sales of slaves to Germany and the Baltic. Taken together, and pre and post 1492 periods offer the possibility that many Europeans have a trace of American ancestry. Okay, say what? All right, this is how deep it's about to get. So could some of these black Europeans that are coming be returning home? A large percentage of them, I would say yes. I wouldn't generalize and say, yeah, all of them, because they were over there for many years, mixing. A lot of them. You know, I wouldn't say all of them, but as it's saying here, this offers the possibility that many Europeans have a trace of American ancestry, enough to complicate perhaps the work of geneticists, seeking to trace human history by means of blood markers and DNA characteristics. So no wonder you show relation and it comes up, oh, you got this percentage European, this percentage that. It's just showing relation. Don't mean you come from that person. They could come from you. They could have American ancestry. Get it? I think, however, that the heart of our story must consist in the skill, courage, and adventurousness of these Americans who set sail on the high seas in kayaks of skin, dugouts of wood, great rafts dugout joined together, and even on the coast of California in the tumult boats of sewn together planks. These ancient Americans were sailors and explorers, even in the coldest and most dangerous of seas. Neither the frigid climate of northern Greenland nor the hurricane-stirred waters of the Caribbean succeeded in blocking their setting out to the sea for food, trade, and love of adventure. Francis Bacon in his New Atlantis, 1623, we got the original book we read from before. He literally said America is Atlantis. He put it in parentheses. Has a spokesperson for the mythical Pacific island of Ben Salem relate the story of how the ancient Americans had very large fleets sailing the seas. All right, so this is Francis Bacon saying this, that the Americans had ships and they were sailing the seas. Listen to what he said. He said about 3,000 years ago, or somewhat more. The navigation of the world, especially for remote voyages, was greater than at this day. And the great Atlantis that you call America that you call America, which have now but junks and canoes, abounded then in tall ships, that the said country of Atlantis, as well that of Peru, then called Coya, as that of Mexico, then named Tirambel, were mighty and proud kingdoms in arms, shipping and riches, so mighty at one time. Listen to this, all right? The Americas, this is the true old world, all right? Marco Polo came here to meet the Grand Khan. They both made two great expeditions, they of Tirambel, all right, again, Anahuac or Mexico, through the Atlantic to the Mediterranean Sea, and they of Coya or Peru, right, through the South Sea upon this our island. Okay, they used to go to the Pacific, the Peruvians. Allegedly, none of the Mexicans were able to return to America from that expedition. And about a century later, Atlantis, America, all right, again, Atlantis, America, all right, you guys seeing it's not just me, Atlantis/America was largely destroyed by great inundations. So you see, by this main accident of time, we lost our traffic with the Americans, with whom all of others we had most commerce, okay? Most commerce. And again, it says here, number one, the footnote, as you guys can see, Francis Bacon's The New Atlantis, all right, from 1623, primary source. He wrote that. Why would he be just making things up? He's letting you know where Atlantis is. As we shall learn, Bacon's fable was not so widely improbable as some might have supposed. So Francis Bacon says Atlantis is America. We're going to read from the book now, Atlantis in America. This is Navigators of the Ancient World, all right? Navigators, we're in the same topic here, okay? Ivor Sapp and George Erickson is written by them. Again, Atlantis in America is the book we're about to get into right now. So we read from the introduction of the other book. We're going to read from the introduction of this book as well. And it says here, what truly is our past? Antiquity is full of the praises of another antiquity, still more remote, Voltaire. What truly is our future? A crack in the teacup opens a lane to the land of the dead. W.H. Auden. In 1947, when Thor Heyerdahl led an expedition aboard a primitive balsa raft, the Kon-Tiki, across over 4,000 miles of the Pacific and into successful landfall in Polynesia, science dismissed him as a lucky adventurer. In 1970, when Heyerdahl successfully navigated the Ra to a bundle reed raft from Africa to the Americas, archaeologists pronounced, and it's a little wrong here, says his story of man's migration by sea as junk science, and described his achievement as one of man's bravery against incredible odds. But neither the Kon-Tiki nor the Ra expeditions were based on man's defiance of the seas. They were based on defiance of scientific dogma and on the concept that man was a marine migrator, willing and able to take to the sea on sturdy rafts. One of Heyerdahl's sea ventures began in the Americas. The other culminated there. Both journeys, as well as hundreds of solo ventures by sailboats, rafts, and virtual bathtubs that soon followed, were facilitated by the steady push of the great ocean currents of the Atlantic and the Pacific, currents that almost met at the slender heart of the Americas. You hear that? In the Americas, these currents. In 1979, when Ivor Sapp first realized that the great stone spheres of the Dickey's Delta in southern Costa Rica were the work and the record of ancient navigators, several compelling questions occurred to him. Who were the people that built them? Was Central America the site, if not the center, of an ancient seafaring civilization? If so, how has knowledge of this civilization been lost to known records? Plato wrote of Atlantis as a great island continent, a center of ancient knowledge, with navigational base at its capital city. The Americas form a great island continent, with an ancient navigational base at its center. Plato also wrote of a golden age, wherein myth and knowledge of the heavens were recreated in ordered city-states on a peaceful earth. All right, Golden Age. The spear builders constructed an orderly, even precise depiction of the heavens. Were they descendants of Atlantis? If so, how did these people relate to the nearby Olmecs and to the ancient Maya? Unlike the Europeans that discovered them, the Maya were able to construct great city-states that existed for centuries without walls, without defensive fortifications, and with interconnecting roads and canals that beckon visitors from the other cities and other continents. The keen vision of the Mayan priest, looking through an unpolluted atmosphere, allowed them to view the heavens in 3 dimensions, a wonderful event that only sailors of the mid-Pacific can now experience. Were they the keepers of the knowledge of the Golden Age, an age of peace and mutual understanding? Did the spear builders and the Mayan astronomers once interact with the peoples of other great megalithic sites, among them the builders of Cusco in Peru, Stonehenge in England, and the Great Pyramids of Egypt? This work will provide an approach to answering these questions. Who are we? What were our ancestors like? When did man achieve mastery of his environment, and how did he spread his dominance throughout the world? How did he relate his recent existence to the greater cosmos? These essential questions of who we have been and why we are what we are have long been answered by myth and by the oral traditions of many peoples of many diverse lands. By their telling, man was not insignificant. He was an essential player in the record of the universe. But since Aristotle, our Eurocentric world's tradition of categories and materialistic science has absolutely rejected any explanations or answers provided by myth, with its animism, fabulous tales, and recountings of great cataclysms, while the tales and legends that myths have provided have been discredited by our written history. That history itself is deeply flawed, all right? The history they teach us in school, that history is deeply flawed, stained by its repeated attempts to justify military and religious conquerors who burned libraries and usurped the real history of past empires. Outside of questionable written records, conventional history has had only glimpses to go by, moments of insight into the long, most often lost records of mankind. Yet, motivated by a belief in Darwinian gradualism, 20th century historians and archaeologists alike have, for the most part, agreed on a single model and defining paradigm for the emergence of civilized man. Continuing, it says, did it really happen that way? Just as Plato spoke of a golden age, legends and myth throughout the world have likewise long spoken of an era of peace and harmony, and of great discoveries by navigation and celestial observations. Our modern views has separated myth from science and history, seeing them as contradictory forces. However, in books carefully recorded by the ancient Egyptians and in numbers devised by the ancient Maya, early man has told us a far different story. In Egypt, priests spoke of a great land to the west as both the birthplace and as the final destination of man, even in the record of summer, deemed the cradle of civilization, right, in parentheses, because it's not. Similar myths had placed the origin of man's great knowledge and imposing accomplishments at a far earlier age and in a place across a vast sea. All right, even in those places that they say that's the oldest world, that's the old world over there, even in their myths over there, they say, nope, man originated across the ocean. In the 16th century AD, as if in confirmation of these myths, Spaniard encountered a civilization carved in stone that portrayed knowledge similar to that described by the ancients of Sumer and of Egypt. All right, they're talking about when the Spanish and Portuguese arrived here, the conquistadors, that they encountered this great civilization, right? That portrayed their knowledge in stone, similar to those of ancient Sumer in Egypt, right? Who were these Spanish and Portuguese, Sephardic Jews, Moorish people, most of them. A record of temple building, hieroglyphics, and astronomy, together with similar means of agriculture to those found in the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt, were all discovered to have arisen in an unexpected place, Mesoamerica. All right, Mesoamerica. To many minds, the stories of myth were revived by these startling discoveries. Christopher Columbus even suggested that he may have discovered the original Garden of Eden. That's facts. He wrote that. The Church of Rome recoiled at the notion. State authorities and historians of the Age of Reason, who had long dismissed myth as a conduit of knowledge, similarly dismissed the Americas as a site of significant ancient civilization, but did not the discovery of so vast and sophisticated an empire at America's heart require the rational sciences to at least consider these civilizations as an important link in man's cultural history? The Catholic Church and conventional science both answered that essential question in the negative. In the 16th century, the Church of the Inquisition decreed that the peoples of the Americas were too primitive. All right, that's the hijack, right? This is what they did. They made you pagans and infidels, right? Savages, so-called devils, so they can take your land. Their city-states were judged more reasoned than Jesus Christ and the civilization of the Mediterranean that had preceded him. In the 20th century, American archaeology echoed that edict by declaring that the ancient Maya emerged from barbarism during the 1st or 2nd century of the Christian era. All right, that's the hijack, what they were saying when they were starting to tell their history in schools. They were judged too reason and too pagan to have played a significant role in the development of worldwide civilization. So he's saying they were made to seem like, oh no, they had nothing to do with, at the beginning of civilization, agriculture, none of that. They just happen to be savage barbarians that happen to learn how to build, pyramids and all that other stuff and calendars. And, this is what they're trying to explain. But this is the true old world, right? In fact, the constructions of ancient American cultures not only had similar means of design in their star temples to those found in the Middle East, they had earlier devised a mathematics superior to any other in the world, all right? However, while admitting these advanced civilizations were remarkable and surely older than some cities in Europe, historians soon pronounced that their constructions were not the equal of ancient sites in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Experts assured the Eurocentric world that the American city-states had not been occasioned by a long period of development, but had somehow spontaneously sprung from a more primitive people, dubbed inspired savages by historians. That's what they were calling the American. They just happen to get inspiration, these savages, and they just build all these cities. But they're not smart. They had nothing to do with the beginning of civilization at all. That's the hijack. So that he's trying to point out something here in the introduction. This author, I hope you guys are understanding what he's saying. How they just brainwashed everybody to think this was like a new world and had nothing to do with the old world. We didn't help in any other way. We didn't influence in any way. And that's totally false. The possibility that the advanced cultures of the old world and new world, right, both in parentheses, could have been interrelated was dismissed as impossible in parentheses and preposterous in parentheses. Quashing all speculation that the step pyramid builders of the Americas could have been related to the ancient Middle East, archaeologists pronounced that construction of even the crudest temples in the Americas had not begun until after pyramid building had ceased in Egypt's summer, and in summer's recipient cultures of Babylonia and Akkad. All right, so they were trying to say, no, America, none of their pyramids are older than any in the other side. That's what they had told us growing up. We have learned otherwise. Oldest pyramid in the world right now, you can go to Caral Super. They tell you it's 5,000, almost 6,000 years old, those pyramids over there. You can see how old they are. There's a lot of them are destroyed and everything. And then the other thing is that we have to trust their carbon dating for them to tell us how old things are based on theories and calculations of something that's not even the rock. Like they're testing organic material that's on top of it or next to it. So either way, we have to trust their dates, right? And so they say, well, that's not as old as this. We have to trust them, who also tells us that we come from monkeys and that everybody came out of Africa. Same people you got to trust when you're dealing with carbon dating. These simplistic declarations have been proven false, all right? But they have been proven false already. Dodge the hijack. We've been here 5 years. Catch up to the presentations. Only in the last few decades of this century have we realized that known Maya sites are much older than previously thought, reaching back over 4,000 years at Coelho in Belize, or recognized that the Olmecs were building pyramids and great stone megaliths for thousands of years before the classic Maya built their cities. Discovery after discovery has revealed that the accepted dates for civilization in the Americas are very wrong. At Chanchan in Peru, Chavan cultures, instead of sudden emergence, displays a continual line of development of a naval culture that dates back over 8,000 years. Pedra Furada. All right, 8,000 years, guys. You hear that? You guys pay attention to this stuff they don't teach us. This is deep stuff. These cultures were very advanced, and 8,000 years ago, they were already very advanced. Pedra Furada in Brazil is now known to have supported a diverse culture over 12,000 years ago. Who's to say these people 8,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, weren't navigating across the world? Monteverde in Chile is at least that old, and many have supported a navigational culture 32,000 years ago. Okay, that's just said that. Navigational, this is the topic of today, right? Navigators across the whole world 32,000 years ago. Without a doubt, civilizations in the Americas go back further than established dates for Mesopotamia or Egypt. All right, we are older. We are older. So we got the oldest land and the oldest civilizations and people. Y chromosome, right? Y chromosome is right here. Albert Perry. 8,000-year-old mummies, all right? The oldest mummies. Chinchorro, check out our previous videos again. Try to catch up. The oldest mummies, all right, in Peru predate identically embalmed Egyptian mummies by 3,000 years. Residue of Holy American tobacco and cocaine recently discovered in 5,000-year-old mummies in Egypt. All right, they had cocaine, right? Coca plant, the cocaine, that's American. They found that in the mummies, 5,000-year-old mummies. How did it get there? Now question this. Were those mummies really from Egypt, or were they brought over there to their museums from America? That's why they got cocaine. Now, either way, if you're saying Egyptians came over here, all right, they came over here and got the coca plant from us. But we already know America's the true old world, and where really ancient Egypt really was. What's the real now? Mississippi. So are you saying Mississippians came down to Colombia, South America, and we had trade and had coca plant, and they were bringing it up to the Mississippi up there, the mound building culture, St. Louis, Cahokia, all the way up to the Ohio Hopewell people, mounds everywhere, pyramids everywhere. So they got cocaine in the mummies, right? Which establishes evidence of contact between the old and new world thousands of years before Christ. The appearance of genetically American cotton, right? American cotton in Asia 10,000 years ago. And evidence of coconuts, sweet potatoes, and the American parrot in the Pacific and Asia 12,000 years ago all confirm a repeated worldwide contact of cultures that could only have been accomplished by navigation. Are you guys listening? We went out from here. The great megalithic structures of the Americas, the spears of Costa Rica, all right, that's my country, the Great Wall of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, and the observatory at Calasasaya near Tijuanacu in Bolivia defy the dates assigned to the origins of civilization by our contemporary model. By significant example, the relatively new science of archaeoastronomy and interpretation of the skies as they appeared to the builders of star temples at Giza in Egypt, at Stonehenge in England, and at the standing pillars of Calasasaya, confirms at each site a civilization more ancient than that established at Sumer. Newly established dates confound traditional history. Not yet established dates at the thousands of known sites not yet excavated will ridicule the current model. All right, thousands of sites that are still going to be found in the Americas. They're doing it now with their LiDAR technology. They're finding them. How large is forgotten history? What has been forgotten may exceed remembered history by a dimension we cannot perceive. That's deep right there. What we're about to find out, guys, the rabbit hole is deep. A lot of forgotten, in parentheses, history. There are now 10,000 known sites of early man in Belize alone. In Belize alone, 10,000. That is still under the jungle. Only a few dozen have been excavated, but the rest remain unexcavated. You guys hear that? It's still there, including the great underwater site of Cerros Maya. New evidence which will document shows that the Maya of Guatemala, the Olmec of Mexico, and the spear builders of Costa Rica were not alone in their mathematical or navigational expertise, and they were not alone in the Americas. The evidence now emerging is that there was not one people, but many who shared the heart of the Americas: Negroid, Asian, Semitic, Aryan, Nordics, and Polynesians. All right, all these phenotypes, basically is what he's saying, were already here, and they were all navigators of the ancient skies and of the ancient seas. Why did early 20th century science dictate that no dates earlier than 3000 BC were possible, even for primitive man in the Americas? Why, in the face of the discovery of far earlier dates, did science adopt an obscure and faulty Inquisition-inspired theory, Beringia? All right, that's a theory for man's migration across great ice sheets to the Americas. All right, why did they do that? Why did they make that up? Basically, is what he's saying. Why, when the site of Tikal was mistakenly dated as AD 100? All right, mistakenly? No, they knew what they were doing when they were doing that. Did archaeology and history immediately decide that this single site was the oldest in Mesoamerica? So they said, yeah, Tikal is from AD 100, all right, and it's the oldest, all right? There's nothing older. That's what they told everybody. While thousands of other presumed but unknown sites lay unexcavated and undated. Why has startling evidence of far earlier sites, such as the stone spheres of Costa Rica, been deemed out of context and ignored by conventional archaeology? If a site is out of context, should we blame the site or the context? Why did Plato and the Egyptian priests insist on Atlantis as an actual place and the Golden Age as an actual occurrence, rather than as theological or dialectical argument? Why have recent believers in the existence of Atlantis placed its location in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, despite obvious evidence that no island continent could have existed there in the space of time that man has inhabited Earth? Why have theorists long ignored Atlantis' obvious placement at the heart of the Americas? Why are they ignoring this, okay? Why have they ignored this? It's in the heart of the Americas, where in glacial times, with With extremely cold, dry, and hostile conditions encircling much of the earth, it could have flourished. Why does Plato's vision of the universe, a spiral within a spiral, resemble a DNA molecule, the building block of human biology? What knowledge did Plato have that was lost to the Eurocentric mind, but was retained and carved in stone in the Americas for millennia before and for several centuries after Christ? Why have myths of flood and cataclysmic destructions been deemed unreliable and impossible by prevailing historians and archaeologists? How does the conventional version of history account for tales by Indians in the Americas Southwest of a green mound of water sweeping over the earth? All right, you hear this? In the Southwest, that water there, mud flood, a legend remembered by a people who lived hundreds of miles from the sea in an area where local floods are always brown with mud washed down from the mountains. How does history account for Noah's flood or for similar accounts in Sumerian and Chinese myth? Why does the myth of the Tower of Babel in Mesopotamia find its exact retelling in the story of Cholula? All right, check out my video on this exact topic they're talking about right here, and its indigenous stories surrounding it, the mythology, the history there. A Mexican pyramid near Pueblo, whose base is the largest of any excavated pyramid in the world. Speaking facts, World Guinness Record, biggest, and whose upper levels were devastated by soldiers and priests working for the Catholic Church of the Inquisition. How do we account for the sudden disappearance of the mammoth, mastodon, dire wolf, saber-tooth, tiger, and many other species of large animals in the Americas at about 12,000 before the present, a date Plato assigned to the destruction of Atlantis, and which also corresponds to recent geological evidence of a sudden melting of ice caps and a rise in sea levels of several hundred feet in the Caribbean? How do we account for sophisticated rock paintings in the Americas at Pedra Furada 32,000 years ago, thousands of years before the traditional dates for the invention of culture in America? Among the animals depicted in the Brazilian paintings are horses and camels, okay? And these are with people, right? I've shown these in previous videos. Both abundant in the Americas at that time, okay? Camels and horses abundant. They originated in America. We have proven this with science. Just Google it. Do the research. Horses and camels went into Asia from America, from here, just like people did. Both abundant here in the Americas at that time, and both sudden victims of a mass extermination 11,500 to 12,000 years ago. Another significant question needs to be asked. If we have taken some small steps in recovering our forgotten history, right? Like as this community, right? Especially us here, right? Remembering this forgotten history. Why do the school books, it says here in 1998, but I would say, why do the school books in 2022, from sixth grade readers to university textbooks, still speak of Columbus as the first navigator to reach the New World? It's still happening today, guys. 2022, they haven't changed it. He's asking this back in 1998. Why do these texts inform us that the Americas were first populated by primitive hunting bands who wandered across the dry, barren sea? And why do they continue to tell us that civilized man is the recent recipient of gradual evolutionary progress? These falsehoods will be repeated well into the 21st century unless we awaken from our slumber and rediscover the forgotten past. All right, it's up to us. Historians and archaeologists have steadfastly sought to establish a pattern of land migration from early man. Being academics and landlubbers, they have viewed the oceans as barriers to contact between civilizations. By contrast, Thor Heyerdahl's basic assumptions sprung from his knowledge that the seas were and are virtual conveyors belts that have always connected the diverse peoples of the world, not separated them. Though Heyerdahl was wrong in his assumption that man's migration was first from the Mediterranean regions to the Americas, and then from the Americas to the Pacific, his considerable courage and great intuition proved that these one-way sea migrations, simple to navigate, providing us with a worldview long closed. In fact, these migrations were not one way, but occurred in many directions over great periods of time. Science and academic authority have replaced myth with a linear and progressive view of history. History has respected Plato and Homer as messengers, but has doubted their message. However, the myth they refer to and their records preserved in stone will tell us who we have been and who we might still become. If there is perceived implausibility in myths, astonishing tales of impossible events, there are also great strengths in myth. Because it is an oral tradition, it has been virtually indestructible. There are people alive today among the Maya, in India, and in Africa who are inheritors of oral traditions and who retain the ability to memorize thousands of lines of mythic song and poetry. The books of Homer were sung before they were written down. Because myth permits man involvement in an interplay with the heavens, it has torched the imagination of countless generations of listeners. We're back in the book, The American Discovery of Europe by Jack Forbes. We go to chapter 1. It says here, Americans across the Atlantic, Galway and the certainty behind Columbus' voyage. Sometime during the 1470s, a group of Native Americans followed the Gulf Stream from the Americas to Ireland. We don't know if they were from the Caribbean region or from North America. We don't know if their journey was intentional or if they were driven eastward by a storm. What we do know is that 2 or more Americans, at least a man and a woman, reached Galway Bay, Ireland, and were there seen by Cristoforo Colom or Columbus long prior to his famous voyage of 1492. So again, Columbus had already met American indigenous people. So he knew where he was going by the time, he became the famous so-called Christopher Columbus. That's not even his real name, if it is a specific person, right? This momentous event, largely ignored by white historians, marks a beginning of the modern age, since it is precisely because of this experience that Columbus possessed the absolute certainty that he could sail westward to Cathay, right? Catayo, or China and India. He can sail west. He knew it. It was over there, the real Cathay. It is true, of course, that Columbus later learned of many arguments favoring the possibility of being able to sail directly westward from Europe to Asia. Most of these arguments were based upon logic, though, and not upon actual concrete evidence. They were arguments derived from books that Columbus studied and annotated, or from conversations and correspondence. He knew it was over there, is basically what he's saying. It is significant that all of the hard evidence Columbus had learned about originated with the actions of Americans or of the American environment itself. That is, the most concrete evidence that a land lay directly to the west of Europe and the offshore islands, such as the Azores, was derived from the drifting of American seacraft to the Azores, from the discovery of American bodies washed ashore, and from the arrival of carved wood and natural objects, driftwood, logs, seeds, reeds, and debris, driven by currents and winds from the west. Columbus learned of them second-hand. He did not see them himself, but learned of them from other persons. Columbus also read books such as Historia Rerum Ubique Gestarum of Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini Pius II, that Indians had been driven by storms to Europe. This was important evidence to him. He wrote in the margins of his copy of Historia Rerum. All right, you guys can go look at these sources and verify your source. They wrote this stuff. They're telling you there was American indigenous people washing ashore before Columbus even went over there. So he wrote in the margins of his copy of Historia Rerum, opposite the reference to Indian vessels reaching Germany with people and merchandise. So they give you the original, and it says here, translated If it was an extremely great distance between India and Germany, the vessels could not pass without ill fortune, but this proves it is near at hand, all right? When he said India, he meant India Superior. This remark shows that Columbus was carefully studying Aeneas Historia as part of his examination of the feasibility of sailing westward to Asia. It also proves that Columbus was quite interested in the evidence that Indians could sail to the coast of Europe. But what a difference between reading of that in a book and actually seeing Indians in the flesh with one's own eyes. Columbus wrote also in the margins of Piccolo Mini's Historia Rerum the following incredibly significant comment. So we're going to grab this right here. We're going to copy it. Again, it shows the footnote from Aeneas Sylvius, all right, Imango Mundi. We come to Google Translate here. It detected Latin. You see that? And it says here in English, people came from Catayo, or the Catay, right, towards the east. Towards the east, right? That's if you're coming from America going to Europe, that's the east. We have seen many remarkable things, and especially in the work of Iberni, a man and a wife, and two trees taken from a wonderful person. But that was written by Aeneas Sylvius, and Aeneas Sylvius lived in 1010 to 1079 BC. All right, we're talking about BC times. He wrote that. He wrote that Indians watched the shore over there. You see how long ago that was? Let me go back to the book. So we got the thing right here that he's talking about, and the footnotes telling us Aeneas Sylvanus. All right. All of Columbus' notes in Piccolomini's Historia Rerum were written in a very late Latin with terms that are not always clear, but the first part of the preceding notes reads unmistakably, people from Catayo came towards the east. We saw many notable things, and specifically in Galway, Ireland, a man and a wife. The note then goes on to use late Latin terms that are presented in almost shorthand manner and that have been interpreted variously. One author translates, that is, two persons hung on two wrecks, a man and a woman, a superb creature. Another author translates the same phrase quite differently. A man and a woman of great stature or well built in boats adrift. Samuel Eliot Morison presents us with still a different interpretation as a man and a woman taken in two small boats of wondrous aspect. All right, you see all these primary sources, they quote in that American Indians washed up on Ireland, and this is something Columbus had read and knew about. A fourth translator states, hombres de Catayo vinieron al oriente. All right, men from Catay came to the Orient. Nosotros hemos visto muchas cosas. It says, people from Catayo came to the east. We have seen many notable things, and especially in Galway and Ireland, a man and a woman on some wood dragged by the storm of admirable form. The problem with Columbus Latin is that dubus lignis means literally with two woods or with two timbers or logs. Lignis does not specifically mean either boat or wreck. The most logical conclusion is that lignis was used to refer to two dugout logs, to Native American style piraguas or canoas, as found from South America northward to Virginia and Massachusetts. Europeans would have lacked a word other than log to describe a solid wood boat. Columbus later used the Arab term almaria for such craft. Incidentally, this use of lignis confirms that the people of Catayo were indeed from America and not flat-faced Finns or Labs, all right? They had canoes. As Morison suggests, people from the north would not have been going in an easterly direction, and they would not have had log boats. Moreover, they would not have been drifting on logs either, since the currents of that area came from America to Galway and would have carried any Sami or Finnish drifters to the far north of Norway, not to Ireland. All right, so we're back in the book Atlantis in America, Navigators of the Ancient World by Ivor Sapp and George Erickson. We go to chapter 1 of this book, and it says here, in 1940, the United Fruit Company was clearing the Diquis Delta region of southwest Costa Rica of its jungle covering to establish a banana plantation when workers happened upon what would later prove to be vast astronomical gardens. All right. They first found the upper parts of huge stone balls, but when the curious workers dug the surrounding soil out, at some considerable expense of energy, they discovered they had uncovered great spheres, some measuring over 9 feet in diameter, and later found to weigh as much as 20 tons. These great balls had once been held aloft by a series of supporting mounds and had been surrounded by stone statues and stelae. Over time, most of the colossal spheres sunk into the ground. Sunk, or were they covered? Some as much as 2 meters below the surface. The spheres caught the interest of Doris Stone, an archaeologist and the wife of general manager of the United Fruit Company in Costa Rica. Stone, in 1949, brought the spheres to the attention of Harvard archaeologist Samuel K. Lothrop while he was in Costa Rica examining other sites. Intrigued by Stone's reports, Lothrop traveled to Dickey's Delta, where he was amazed not only by the size of the granite spheres, but even more impressed by the precision with which massive granite blocks had been carved into perfect spheres, having the same diameter and circumference when measured from any point on the sphere. Even the largest were found to be spherical, to within a few hundredths of an inch. Lothrop, an established authority on Peruvian and Central American archaeology, had come to Costa Rica to study the ceramics of the Chorotega Indians. Okay, have this in my ancestry. But there was nothing that Lothrop had encountered in his investigations of the Chorotega, then thought to be the earliest known organized culture in what is now Costa Rica, that suggested the abilities to construct so large and so precise a megalith. And there were hundreds of these mysterious spheres in the Diquis region, all right, hundreds of these, and hundreds more, if not thousands, in the surrounding mountains, okay? There's thousands of these spheres all over Costa Rica. Since the Chorotega lacked the technology to build them, and since there was no known presence in Mesoamerica of an earlier and more sophisticated culture, the spheres became an enigma. Lothrop declared that the site and the spheres were out of context. They simply did not fit within any Mesoamerican context known to Americanist archaeologists. And since the established theories that dated pre-Columbian Costa Rican culture could not be questioned, the spheres themselves had to be dismissed. All right, so you hear what they're saying? It didn't fit their narratives, you know, because this is from an old advanced culture that was here in Costa Rica that built these spheres, these perfect round spheres. The technology, they can't even do it today. Lothrop made no attempt to date the spheres, although he expressed the opinion that they were much older than surrounding sites. He took accurate measurements of the spheres and mapped their layouts and their arrangements in groups. Upon inquiry, he managed to correlate the spheres to local folklore and myth that the spheres were related to the phenomena that takes place in the sky. A few Indians told him that the spheres had something to do with the cyclical movement of the sun, moon, and the stars. All right, and here's one of them right here they have in the book. It says here, sphere that has been removed from its original site and sits on a lawn in Palmar Sur, Costa Rica. But we have a lot of these rich people, or municipal buildings or anything, they have them in the front of their buildings or their garden, It's like, yeah, look, we took it, After Lothrop's brief study of the spheres presented in archaeological remains of the Diquis Delta of Costa Rica, few archaeologists outside Costa Rica showed any interest in these great spheres. When their evidence was first presented, an issue of Natural History magazine, 1955, declared that it is thought that the civilization that manufactured these spheres must have been highly advanced. But because they did not fit into the preconceived context and pretext, archaeologists in general avoided dealing with these megaliths. A few academics and researchers declared that the spheres were the work of the native Boruca Indians, another culture that never showed any ability to construct such megaliths, and casually gave them a probable date from the 9th to the 20th century AD. Over the years, the spheres hidden in the midst of a large banana plantation in a remote and steamy jungle lay forgotten by all but the occasional looters who found a way to truck them to the gardens and lawns of wealthy Costa Ricans living in the Central Highlands. This is what I was saying. All right, these conquistadors, descendants, and all these people, these hijacks, now they got it in their lawns. All right. Through uncertainty and neglect, an important archaeological discovery was categorized as an enduring enigma and abandoned to the banana fields. When Ivar Sapp entered the picture, the spheres had become an all but forgotten local riddle. Fascinated by the spheres, Ivar, while teaching in the School of Architecture at the University of Costa Rica in 1981, took his students on a field trip to the steamy Dikis Delta. After an examination of those spheres still in situ, he proposed a series of interesting questions to his students. Who built them? How were they built? How were they transported to a place so far from any rock quarries? How were the other spheres found high in the coastal mountains of Costa Rica, possibly moved there? Then Ivar asked his students to ignore these questions and instead concentrate on another. Since so much thought and effort had gone into the construction, polishing, and geometric perfection of these spheres, what could have been the function of these megaliths? His students, though fascinated by the objects, enigmas in the jungle mist, had no ready answer. But then neither did Ivar. His field trip was meant to be an exercise in awareness of architectural function. But the questions Ivar raised to his students came to dominate his own thoughts. What could the function of these spheres have been? Ivar had long been interested in the work of John Michell, whose orientation of the ley lines of Stonehenge and other sites in Britain pointed to ancient knowledge of the Earth's integral position under heavenly bodies. Mitchell's investigation established the relationship of the Celts, through their architectural constructions, not only to solar and astral entities, but also to other ancient structures in Giza in Egypt, to the Etruscans, and to the builders of Baalbek in Phoenicia. Could something similar have occurred in the far distant past in Costa Rica? All right, and it says here, configurations of the spheres of Costa Rica. The layout of the spheres as found and diagrammed by S.K. Lothrop. Spheres E and F are now in the Museo Nacional in San Jose, Costa Rica. So this is how they were found in a line. And this was, look at this, looked like a constellation or something, right? Or it could be something else. Professor Sapp and his students first studied the layout of the spheres that remain in situ. Then they consulted the layouts made 42 years earlier by Lothrop. They found that in most cases, the stones were arranged in groups of 3 forming a triangular configuration. Ivar noticed that an axis line formed between 2 major groups of the spheres was oriented to the magnetic North Pole, indicating that the builders had a knowledge of the magnetic compass. Ivar, on intuition, then took a Mercator atlas and projected the directional lines implied by the layout of the spheres. The implied lines of the spheres missed contact with other significant sites by as much as 400 miles. But the Mercator atlas, long used by European navigators, is flat, and the Earth is a sphere. Using a globe and consulting maps that reflect the dimensions, Ivar found that the 19 degrees southwest inclination of the line that intercepted spheres E and F, projected from the Palmar Sud side in the Dikis Delta, leads to Cocos Island, to the Galapagos Islands, and then to Easter Island. In fact, smaller but similarly perfect spheres have been found on Easter Island, but these spheres have been moved. So if they once pointed back to the Americas, this access to knowledge is now lost. The directional line implied by spheres D and F project a line that, followed to the northeast, leads to the Straits of Gibraltar. If projected southwest, leads to the Marquesas. In another group, the axis leads to the Great Pyramids of Giza. In another, it leads to Stonehenge. In every case, the megaliths of Costa Rica pointed to great megaliths of distant lands and islands. You hear what they're telling you here, right? It was pointing everywhere, telling you where they were in the world. It was like a map. It says here, right, the lines of sphere E and F projected from the Palmar Sud side in the Dikis Delta lead directly to Cocos Island and the Galapagos Island, and then to Easter Island. And it says here below, national directional lines of the spheres of Costa Rica. All right, so they're going to show you how it leads to different parts. You see how they all gather right here in the middle. And as you can see, Central America is the middle. Central, you see, is right on the Caribbean. This part probably had more land before, you know. And you see how all these lines are heading somewhere important. Sight lines on a flat map or even a small globe are one thing. Sight lines on an actual sphere, our Earth, are another. The EF projection line of the spheres of Dickey's Delta was tested by a pilot friend of Ivar's using the arc geometry of an onboard computer on a Boeing 727. The result of this test showed that 19 degrees directional line extended over 7,000 plus kilometers from Costa Rica resulted in a projected flight that missed Easter Island by 70 kilometers, 42 miles. At first, this result bothered Ivar, but a 72-kilometer miss in long-range ocean voyaging has been demonstrated by the Polynesians to be a virtual hit. Experienced and able navigators need not make a precise strike on an island destination. By reading swell patterns in waves and cloud formations both disturbed by the presence of islands, and by observing the presence of land-based birds such as terns or nudis, navigators can detect the position of an island 100 kilometers before sighting it. Were the ley lines of Celtic megaliths and the sight lines of the spheres of Costa Rica coincidences? If so, why did one implied sightline, formed by the three great spheres, point directly to Stonehenge? Ivar was certain that such implied directional paths could not be merely coincidental. He believed that he had discovered something very similar to the ley lines, by which the Druids of Britain connected Stonehenge and Glastonbury with ancient Greek, Etruscan, and Egyptian sites. He then realized that he had possibly led his university students out of their classrooms in San Jose and onto the grounds of a far more ancient university. But the question of function and purpose haunted Ivar. If the spheres represented terrestrial directions rather than or in addition to star paths, what were the students of this ancient university being taught? Then it came to him navigation. Surely these students of old were being taught how to navigate both the heavens and the seas. The implications of such a theory went far beyond anything that Ivar had encountered in his studies. Even John Michell had only expressed his ley lines as sight lines. Navigational theory had not entered Michell's theories or proposals. Thus, Ivar realized that he would need to look beyond the published archaeological records for traces of ancient navigators, launching an investigation that would dominate the next 14 years of his life. Ivar pursued the question through an examination at actual sites of the known archaeological record, reappraised to include the possibility of navigation as the means by which man's ideas migrated from one continent to another, just like we were reading in the other book, how we passed the culture around. On assignment, one of Ivar's students, Humberto Carro, found evidence of the use of an ancient sextant used by Arab navigators. All right, listen to this. Muslim Arab navigators, the Moors, that was described in detail in the 13th century manuscript that became the basis for the classic, The 1001 Arabian Nights. Through the character Sinbad, the sailor, the tales contained in this classic probably depicted adventures of many Sinbads, stretching back through hundreds of sailings over thousands of years. It was the use of these voyages of a rectangular sextant. All right, we're going to show the images. All right, this is what we're just reading about. Called a kamal by the Arabs that caught Carro's attention. The kamal was made of two wooden rectangles united by a long knotted cord. Each knot on the cord represented the latitude of a known port. Northern ports were represented by knots closest to the rectangle. Ports closer to the equator were represented by knots that permitted a fuller extension of the arm, effectively lowering the sighting latitude of the kamal. By holding the knot represented a port and his teeth, and extending the kamal with its edge on the horizon and pointing it at Polaris, the accomplished navigator could determine his position relative to the latitude of his destination. All right, so when I read this, it says here, knotted cords, and it shows this guy. Tim Severin demonstrates the use of the kamal and knotted cord in a National Geographic magazine article in July 1982. 13 years later, in an article of Maya murals at Bonampak, all right? In Bonampak, they had the same image. Knotted cords extending from the mouth, believed by the present authors to be a vestige of a degenerate naval traditions, are described as examples of barbaric torture and ritual savagery. All right, they're trying to say, they said, oh no, they're just doing some barbaric stuff, but it was actually the Mayas and the people in Costa Rica and ancient America were actually using this to help them navigate. All right, now let's go look at some examples of this. All right, as it says here, if Polaris appeared above the height of the Camal, the sailor had ventured north of his destination. Okay, if Polaris appeared below, the sailor was too far south. If the North Star aligned with the rectangle, the ship and destined port were on the same latitude, and the sailor was on course. All right, and then we have this image right here. This is made out of gold. I'm going to show you guys one day. I'm going to go to the Gold Museum and show you some real live artifacts here in Costa Rica of this. There's so many of these found here, and these were navigational tools. These are navigational tools, guys. You see, he's doing it too. It says figures with knotted cords extended from their mouths, often tethered to rectangular shapes, have been found throughout the Diquis Delta region of Costa Rica. Surely these were navigational instruments, not torture devices. All right, dodge the hijack. That was by R.A. Jairas Hoy, Ancient Egyptians and Chinese in America. All right, that's another book we're going to get into. Notes that in both ancient America and Egypt, gods are depicted with the odd characteristic of a double twisted rope issuing from their mouths. Another similarity is the Egyptian custom of placing small strips of papyrus by the dead, and the Mexican custom of placing bunches of paper with dead. Obviously, both people had a belief in the power of the written word to transcend earthly life, but it could not transcend nor long survive the burnings and desecration of less enlightened cultures that followed. All right, that was when the Moors and Sephardic Jews came, the less enlightened. You know, they burned up everything, and the Catholics. What struck Ivar and his student Umberto was that knotted rope extended from the mouth was very similar to a repeated motif on pottery and gold pendants that Lothrop had found in association with the spheres of Diquis Delta. Lothrop characterized these numerous items as representing snake coming out of the mouth a deity. All right, you hear that? See what they were saying? That's rope they had. And this guy, this hijack archaeologist that was here in Costa Rica, this guy named Lothrop, he was probably sent as an agent, gatekeeping, and he's saying, yeah, that's nothing, that's not rope or navigators, that's just snakes coming out of his mouth. He's a deity. But Ivar had believed them to be simply units of measure. Again, Ivar had questioned their function. Now he felt he had an answer. If his hypothesis was correct, it was a geographically large answer. This same symbolism, the knotted cords coming out of the mouth, has also been depicted in pre-Inca burial sites in Peru, and on stela and the archaeological sites of Copan in Honduras, and Bonampak and Xachilang in the Yucatan. In India, similar depictions have been found in pre-Aryan sites in the Indus Valley and among the followers of Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction. This discovery only made Ivar more determined to find other instruments that could serve a common function among diverse ancient naval cultures. Again, Umberto Caro came up with the key evidence. He found an article among the reports to the 23rd Congress of Americanists held in Costa Rica in 1952 by Thor Heyerdahl, which explained the technique of sailing balsa rafts against the currents and against the wind. In the article, Heyerdahl shows how the ancient Peruvians were able to achieve this counter-current navigation by use of removable centerboards called guara, functioning like keels, but in use in the Americas for thousands of years before the keel was invented. 7 to 12 foot long guaras were inserted between balsa logs and lifted or lowered to achieve the desired tacking effect. Centerboard navigation in great rafts that carried from 50 to 75 men and 20 to 40 tons of cargo was in wide use at the time the first Spanish came to Peru. When Francisco Pizarro's fleet reached the northern coast of the Inca Empire, they encountered a whole flotilla of balsa rafts carrying Inca soldiers. The Spanish were surprised by the number of rafts and by their great size, almost equal to their own caravels, all right, almost equal to their ships. But to the Spaniards, the most amazing thing was that the rafts were moving swiftly toward them, all right, and they were fast, against the current and against the wind. Curious, Pizarro managed to draw alongside several of the rafts. The Incas were as curious about the Spanish and allowed them to board. The Spaniards, initially pretending to be friendly, boarded the vessel, threw 11 of the crew overboard, left 4 to the raft, and took 2 men and 3 women prisoners to be trained as interpreters. Do you hear what these Sephardic Moorish Catholics did when they came over here? You see, they tricked them. They were being friendly, the Indians in Peru. All right, they were being friendly, these indigenous people, and then they tricked them. All right, threw 11 of them overboard and imprisoned the rest of them. Pizarro's contemporaries recorded the secret of balsa raft navigation, although they didn't fully understand it at the time. Pizarro and his men were told of balsa journeys along the entire coast of South America. They were also given directions on how to sail to Easter Island and to Polynesia, all right? They were telling these Spaniards, these Moors, Sephardic Jews, how to get to Polynesia from here. Sure, you can just go that way, trust us. We do it all the time. But Pizarro had little interest in sailing techniques or directions to Polynesia, or any obscure or fancied and distant islands. Through his captive interpreters, he learned that the reason for the great number of balsa rafts full of soldiers he had encountered was that the Incas were involved in a bloody civil war. Pizarro's quest for El Dorado, the legendary city of gold, yeah, the civil war gave him the opportunity to use the Inca people against one another, utilizing the high esteem conferred on him, that of the returning god Viracocha. Pizarro organized an army of Peruvians deeply angry at the Inca regime. His expedition, fortified by thousands of Indians, pushed inland high into the Andes to capture Cusco, the Inca capital, a city covered with gold. Again, Cusco, huh? What is Cusco? The city of David, Prester John, the city covered with gold? Remember, Marco Polo said that the great Khan city was covered with gold. He went all the way to Cusco. Marco Polo went all the way to the farthest east, the real, superior India, the farthest east. This is Asia. So they got a bunch of hijacked Indians, right, who allied themselves because they had war with the other indigenous people there in the Inca Empire. They had a civil war. They allied themselves with the Moors and the Sephardic Jews and went against the other indigenous people to capture Cusco, the Inca capital, a city covered with gold. Within 2 years, the Incan Empire fell to the Spanish. Centerboard sailing on balsa rafts survived for a few generations, then was all but forgotten. But historic accounts, most written by chroniclers accompanying Pizarro and other Spanish conquistadors, remain. And wooden guaras, some carbon 14 dating to thousands of years before Pizarro's conquest of Peru. Thousands of years, these so-called rafts, all right, these ships, these boats, are still being found in the deserts of Peru. They're still finding them there, thousands of them. A serious obstacle to rediscovering Costa Rica's past navigational culture and its climate and soil. Peru's extremely dry climate and sandy soil permitted preservation. Wooden guara boards are not the only objects to survive millennia of neglect. Mummies, 3,000 years older than the oldest mummies found in Egypt, have recently been uncovered in the high deserts of southern Peru and northern Chile. All right, we've gone over this in my past videos that Chinchorro mummies are the oldest mummies in the world, predating anything in Africa and the Sudan and Egypt, anywhere in the world, okay? Do the research or go watch the video. I show you the sources. By contrast, in Costa Rica's tropical wet climate and highly acidic soil, wood, flesh, and bones disintegrate quickly. All right, that's one thing about Costa Rica. Things here, the rain, all that, things just, disintegrate. No records of rafts, ships, or wooden guara boards, or the people who used them could survive in such a climate. So even the bones, all right, disintegrate. That's something I didn't really think about, So a lot of the, bones that could have been tested and all these things are gone. Here in Costa Rica, the climate here again is very tropical, as they're saying here. In fact, no wooden guaras have been found in Costa Rica. Yet, Ivar immediately recognized that a curious event occurred on the first encounter of Europeans with native Costa Ricans. Christopher Columbus was long considered to be the first historical navigator to reach the Americas from the Old World, all right, in parentheses. On his first 3 voyages, Columbus encountered only islands, which he believed to be the East Indies. But on his 4th voyage, determined to find the Asian continent, he found instead another continent making landfall near present-day Limon, Costa Rica. All right, so Limon, Puerto Viejo's, I did one of the videos recently where I went to Puerto Viejo, Limon. The place he actually landed was not far from there, about 5 kilometers or less, probably less, like 2 kilometers. Playa Ubita in Limon, Puerto Viejo, Costa Rica. That's where Columbus set foot. Little beautiful place over there. Columbus has become a boring topic of discussion, but as his encounter in Costa Rica has particular significance, because of the size of their ships, Columbus and his party were accepted as great navigators by the native Costa Ricans. Columbus' son Diego reported how their party was taken, almost immediately upon arrival, on a 2-hour walk to the burial of an important person. Diego describes the lapida that the dead man was laid out on, and describes a prow of a ship underneath him. From this account and other evidence, it has generally been accepted that these lapidas were both the bearers and the grave covers of priests and kings. All right, listen to this. I can't make this up. All right, Drop Nation, you're hearing priests, kings, a Khan. From this account and other evidence, it has generally been accepted that these lapidas were both the bearers and the grave covers of priests and kings. A priest and a king here in Costa Rica. On examining the lapidas, what Ivar realized was that the guaras, centerboards of Peru, and the lapidas of Costa Rica were virtually identical in size, just like the Peruvians' shape and ornamentation. No one had noted their similarities before, but no one had been looking for naval implications to Costa Rican sites. If the stone funeral slabs of Costa Rica were identical to the functional wooden guaras of Peru, why have stone slabs at all? They would be too heavy for practical utilization. The use of lapidas as freestanding stone slabs on mounds and as part of the statuary of ceremonial centers at Guayabo had long puzzled archaeologists, right? Guayabo is an archaeological site here in Costa Rica. I'm going to bring you guys there one day, okay? What the archaeologists had interpreted as ceremonial centers, Ivar saw as astronomical gardens. The stone slabs were found only in sacred astronomical navigational grounds. Ivar deduced the answer. When he saw the drawings and description of the Peruvian guaras, he knew what the function of the lapidas had been. For guaras and lapidas had functioned as the same thing, navigational centerboards. What Columbus and his son didn't realize was that the burial the Costa Rican Indians wanted him to witness was not of a king, but that of another great sailor, an important pre-Columbian navigator whose grave had been covered by a stone lapida. It makes sense that the navigators would be buried under the replica of an instrument that made their long and difficult voyages possible, both as an honor and as a way to steer them in the journeys of the afterlife. Columbus showed little appreciation for symbols of navigation and put no particular emphasis on the encounter. Disregarding the stone lapidas, Columbus' first inquiries of the people he encountered were of the gold pendants, discs, and other adornments they wore. The Indians, in parentheses, told him that they had obtained their gold from a fabulous people who lived on the far coast of their land. These people were called the Siguarenses, a sea-going people, and that they brought vast riches and cargoes filled with gold, silver, and precious stones from distant lands. The following is Columbus' own account, according to Felipe Valentini's work, The Fourth Voyage of Christopher Columbus. In all the places where I had gone, I found it to be true that I had heard. This certified this is true about the province of Siguare, which according to them is described as 9 days by foot towards west. There they say is infinite gold, and they wear corals on their heads, and rings of coral on their feet and arms, and very thick rings, and also stools, chests, tables are covered with coral. They also said that the women wore necklaces that went from the head to the shoulders. And what I say, all the people from these places coincide, and they say so much that I would be glad to have 10%. They also use black pepper. In Siguares, their custom is to exchange merchandise in their markets. These people tell us this, and they showed me the way they traded cheaply. Others tell us that the ships bring cannons, arrows, swords, armor plates. The people go about fully dressed. On land, there are horses, and they make war. Listen, there are horses. Land, they had horses. Listen, they didn't bring horses, they had horses. All right, horses are from America. They wear rich garments, and they have good things. It is also said that the sea forms an arch around Siguare. And from there, 10 days walk is the river Ganges. The river Ganges. All right, listen to this, man. The river Ganges. We're in Costa Rica and Panama, this area. This is where we are. It looks like these lands are far from Veragua as Tortosa is from Fuenterrabia or Pisa from Venecia. The local people were apparently indicating two things to Columbus. First, a people different in customs to their own existed on the Pacific coast in southern Costa Rica who called themselves the Siguare. Second, that the Siguare possessed naval equipment, gold objects, and naval culture similar to that which Columbus seemed to represent. These people, the Siguarenese, were never found, although recent finds of gold pendants associated with navigational tools in the Diquis Delta near present-day Golfito, about a 10-day walk from Limon, and about which the sea forms an arch, indicate that such a naval culture did exist. The great spheres of Diquis Delta had apparently been long buried, but it is obvious that even as late as time of Columbus, that region was held in high esteem as the center of a naval culture. Right? They're talking about here Costa Rica. It has recently been determined by the authors that the site described in the Diquis Delta was no ordinary naval culture, but a highly advanced ancient astral navigation university. Okay? Here in Costa Rica, ancient world, the real true old world, so-called Atlantis. 60 years after Columbus, Vasquez de Coronado, endeavoring to conquer this geographical area, hired several large Indian piraguas and their crews. These long canoes had been sailing north from Panama along the Pacific coast. The size of the vessels, with 18 rowers on each side, and the distances the large boats covered, indicated that sophisticated naval orientations and techniques were present along the Pacific coast of present-day Panama and Costa Rica. Motivated typically by the quest for gold, Coronado was also seeking naval passage between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Under his command, the piraguas began exploring the major rivers of the area looking for a passage to the Caribbean. Between the mouths of the Diquis and Sierpe rivers, Coronado encountered the fortified city of Coctu, which lay in the Diquis Delta. Coctu could have been described as a city-state, a city-state laid out in the form of a ship. Coronado's description of Coctu related an ordered construction and gardens of great beauty. Gardens of great beauty, this is here in Costa Rica, right? May well have been a description of the home of the Siguares. His admiration for the city, which he described as beyond comparison to anything ever seen by the Spaniards, was all the more exceptional since he had lost several men in his efforts to subdue Coctu. With the aid of the Panamanian Indians, so they brought their hijacked allied Indians, Coronado and his conquistadors eventually gained the surrender of this city of 33,600 people. Although its probable location is known, no trace of it remains today. That's the hijack. They don't want to tell you. After the surrender of Coctu, Coronado and his men encountered a great flooding of the Sierpe and Diquis rivers. They took refuge with some friendly Indians who lived in houses built on thick stilts several meters above the plain. Coronado did not know it, but the refuge he and his men had taken was only a few miles from giant spheres that would one day help solve a central mystery of the peoples of the Americas. Based on similarities in jade carvings, pottery, and ornaments, Ivor Sapp felt certain that the peoples who lived in the region of the stone spheres of Costa Rica and the Guara navigators of Peru had shared a common navigational culture. The seafaring sea Jaguares, described to Columbus and the Guara navigators of Peru might have been the same people. Come on, Guares, come on. The fact that it was in Costa Rica, not in Peru, that the Guares were immortalized in stone pointed to Costa Rica as the likely center for the navigator priest. The navigator priest, listen to this, navigator priest, some cons in the ships. Ivor faced two major obstacles in providing his case. The first obstacle was that indigenous population of Costa Rica virtually disappeared within a few generations of the arrival of the Spanish. All right, dodge the hijack, because we still here. Much of the disappearance was attributed to the influenza and smallpox, and much of it was due to the cruelty of the conquering Spanish. No written record of the natives' people existence survived the conquest. All right, dodge the hijack. Let's go to this image right here. Now take a look at this. This is what he's comparing. It says here, stone lapidas found only in Costa Rica correspond to wooden guaras found in Peru. Comparing lapidas and guaras, Ivor found that they are in uniform in width, length, and thickness. The lapidas are usually thin for stone carvings, generally less than 2 inches in thickness. The most striking similarities are in the ornate carvings that form the top borders and handles of both lapidas and guaras. An often repeated motif is that of 5 to 8 carved men standing side by side holding hands. Another repeated motif in Costa Rica depicts twins, sometimes twin birds, all right, twins, sometimes twin beasts, sometimes twin man-beasts. And the concept of twins harken back to Plato's description of Atlantis. All right, listen to this, twins, a great empire divided among 5 sets of twins. The stone arrangement of the twins also often imply navigational directions. All right, twins, just like Plato describes. Here's another image right here. This is Ivor Sapp himself, the author. It says here, inspecting a sphere. After years of study of the mysterious spheres, Ivor Sapp noticed the similarity in the layout of the spheres to ley lines that are found in the British Isles and to sighting stones found in the Pacific. Suddenly, the thought occurred to Ivor that these were navigational tools. Through an examination of the probable functions of the spheres, Ivor Sapp came to understand that they not only represented celestial bodies, but that they also indicated ley lines that connected the sites of ancient cultures and the routes of ancient navigators. Continuing in the book, it says, however, Ivor has found possible evidence that the more sophisticated navigational peoples of Costa Rica, on hearing of the terrible conquistadors, had simply sailed away into the Pacific, taking what written records they might have had with them. But they could not take the stone spheres. Listen to this. Ancient Costa Ricans, right? They're saying some of them might have become Southeast Asians. What Columbus and Coronado failed to recognize was, in fact, the last vestige of the great navigational culture of the Americas, one that drew on its memories and lessons back to the golden age of navigation and to traces of man's greatest age on Earth. What the American navigational cultures had retained knowledge of, and what Columbus almost rediscovered, was the remnants of the civilization that had given birth to the Sumerian, Egyptian, Basque, and Celtic cultures. All right, bomb drop, woo, mic drop. Sorry about that. It's just, come on, man. I'm gonna repeat it again. Pay attention, all Pan-Africans out there. Another source, more correlation. All right, America is the truer world. Who civilized who? what the American navigational cultures had retained knowledge of. And what Columbus almost rediscovered was the remnants of the civilization that had given birth to the Sumerians, Egyptian, Basque, and Celtic cultures, all right? Okay, America is mama, grandma, all right? Oldest people on earth. While these other cultures had all but forgotten the continent across the sea, only the Phoenicians of Carthage visited there regularly, all right? Who's the Phoenicians? I told you they were coming from here. Whether knowledge of the Americas was a Phoenician rediscovery or simply a continuation of use of trade routes long known to ancient sea peoples is unknown, but there is strong evidence that the latter is closer to the truth. Iver realized that if his hypothesis that the spheres were teaching instruments of a naval culture was to be tested, he would have to study a known naval culture, one where ancient traditions and techniques were still in use. Iver sought the advice of archaeologists at the University of Costa Rica. They agreed that his theory was both startling and promising, but none seemed to know of culture where ancient navigational techniques were still practiced. Then a friend gave Iver a book that would profoundly influence and confirm his perspective on ancient man. The book was We, the Navigators by David Lewis. In this book, Lewis presents a wealth of information on a Pacific-wide system of navigational learning, much of it still alive in the late 1960s. When Lewis undertook to recreate the routes of ancient voyagers, Lewis voyaged over 13,000 nautical miles sailing under the guidance of native islanders on native crafts, using native star paths taught to his guides by their fathers and their fathers' fathers, without benefit of any modern navigational equipment or techniques. Lewis and his island mentors never once failed to reach their often distant intended landfall. You hearing that? They did it the natural way. Lewis' exploits, primarily accomplished on outrigger canoes, are riveting, yet on reading Lewis' record, what first caught Iver's eye was the description of sighting stones. Although Lewis' sources spoke of many stone astronomical gardens throughout the Pacific, Lewis was only able to report personally on stones on Niafayos in Tonga and on Butaritaris and Orari, respectively, the northernmost and southernmost of the Gilbert Islands. The Gilbertese called the unusual configuration of stones that stand near the northwestern point of Arorae the Atibu ni Borao, the stones for voyaging. They, wow. First mapped by Captain E.V. Ward in 1946. When there were 13 stones, there are now 8. They were described as flat slabs of coral about 5 feet by 4 feet and about 6 inches thick, set on edge and secured by paving. Lewis describes the voyaging stones of Arorare as mostly grouped in 3 in the manner shown, to indicate the bearings of islands in the southern Gilberts and Banaaba. Lewis adds, sighting stones seem to have been used to align canoes on taking departure in the same manner as natural landmarks, and probably also for recording and teaching star courses. The sighting stones that Lewis describes in the Gilbert Islands of the Polynesia were similarly constructed and were laid out in configurations very like those of the spheres of Costa Rica. Sapp examined Lewis' maps and found again that by extending their express lines and angles, they led to the initiation of sea routes that extended to major archipelagos of the Pacific Ocean. Because 99% of the Pacific is open water, could the chance that sighting stones led directly to landfall be by chance? Further research into the oral tradition of the islanders revealed that the stone arrangements of Arorae were used by the navigator caste of the Polynesians to teach star patterns to their sons or daughters. The eldest offspring were students virtually all their lives, learning the names of stars that aligned themselves with the stones on given dates during the year. The stones had been placed in such manner that these horizon stars would align with the stones at the best time of year to initiate a certain sailing course. In addition to horizon stars, the students were taught sailing by reference to zenith stars, star paths, and star columns, all requiring and exact knowledge of hundreds of stars and star constellations. A navigational university was at work in Aurora and had been at work for thousands of years. Most Europeans who encountered the Polynesians regarded their methods and their boats with scorn, but the methods at least were far superior to anything the Europeans had devised, all right? Through David Lewis' research, Ivor learned that the people of Polynesia were in possession of a highly sophisticated and evolved know-how about navigation. Ivor wondered, could it be that the people of South Central and North America also had such knowledge? The spheres of Costa Rica were similar but far older and far more sophisticated than the sighting stones of the Gilbert Islands, all right? It's far older here in Costa Rica, these stones, and more sophisticated, okay? The possible function of the mysterious monolithic stone spheres indicated that, unsuspected by land-based archaeologists, a great naval culture may have existed in Central America. In Ivor's view, the directional information contained in the layout of stone spheres demanded a reevaluation of the current perspectives and archaeological models applied to the civilizations found in America. The sighting stones of Arorae and their use as teaching instruments confirmed Ivor's hypothesis, but no reputable archaeologist had ever hinted that the pre-Columbian peoples of America practiced the long-range oceanic navigation implied by the stone spheres of the Diquis Delta. Explorer theorist Thor Heyerdahl, famed for his voyages on the Kon-Tiki from Peru to New Zealand and the Ra expeditions in which he voyaged from Egypt to the Antilles, stood alone in realizing the navigational capabilities of early Americans. But Heyerdahl was dismissed as a lucky adventurer by the archaeological establishment. Heyerdahl's theory of ancient navigation by papyrus boats and balsa rafts, despite his achievements, was not probable as actual historic record, due to the extremely soft nature of the materials used in their construction. No ancient ships were likely to be found. In truth, archaeologists have not, until only very recently, looked for navigational instruments at archaeological sites. For Ivor, by contrast, the discovery of the function of one navigational object led to the search for another. Seeking traces of navigational function in gold pendants, jade knives, huge ceramic pots of the type necessary for storage of water on long-distance voyages, stone water mirrors, and other objects, he was rarely disappointed. Among the items that stood out prominently above the others were repeated and dominant themes of the four-sided, sometimes eight-sided, Atlantean cross and the shallow concave bowls held by four Atlanteans. Ivor's investigation of the archaeological record showed that pre-Columbian Costa Rica shared cultural patterns whose origins could be found everywhere throughout the Americas. Listen, man, that's deep. Wow. From the shared Atlantis motif of the Toltecs to the navigational instruments of the early Peruvians. As such, ancient Costa Rica must have constituted a melting pot of navigational cultures, just as cultural port cities today, such as New York and Hong Kong, represent a diversity of cultural traits. Ivor was certain that the evidence put Costa Rica squarely in the middle of an ancient navigational culture, one that not only existed contemporaneously with the formative Maya, the Olmecs, and pre-Incas, but very possibly predated them. All right, very possibly predated them, okay? Predated them. Hadn't others made the connection? Ivor studied all the recent publications of Americanists, consulted and interviewed the available archaeologists in Costa Rica. It seemed they had not. Pursuing what we could characterize as a terrestrial imperative, archaeologists had collectively disdained any navigational abilities of Native Americans, with the exception of Thor Heyerdahl, who academic authorities scoffed at as a lucky amateur, and the distinguished Near East scholar Cyrus Gordon, author of Before Columbus, no voice spoke up for the Americas as a navigational culture. he pointed out some Pan-Africans there, right? So Cyrus Gordon wrote, you know, that they found Negro here and it was Africans that came here. He ain't trying to give credit to the Americas. As this author is pointing out, these are Pan-Africans, all right? A lot of people try to, hey, read that book, and we have read that book, right? We have read it many times, a pretty good book, but you got to dodge the hijack a lot in that book because they're Pan-African. And again, this author is letting you know that they haven't spoken up for the Americas as navigational culture. In fact, Central America was considered to be a backwater of academic studies that had concentrated their investigations on the great ruins in the Yucatan and Guatemala to the north and to Peru in the south. All right, they haven't really been putting attention to those regions. Why he's letting you know. Ivor found that no archaeologists had investigated the naval techniques by which pre-Columbian trade was sustained, even though there was ample evidence of movements of goods between all the regions of America, from the south to the north and vice versa. No archaeologist had even suggested that the fabulous calendars and observatories of the Mayans, Toltecs, and pre-Incas could have been of more functional use to navigators than to farmers, nor did any archaeologists seem to question just what the ceremonies might have been that were supposedly conducted at the ceremonial centers, except to echo the Catholic Church and insisting that pagan rites of sacrifice were somehow responsible for their precise construction. All right, so that's the hijack. The author's letting you know, dodge the hijack with their Catholic jargon. All right, trying to demonize people, make them savages. Ivor realized that religious ceremonies attributed by archaeologists to priests and their ceremonial centers, in parentheses, could actually have been functional universities, teaching astronomy, celestial navigation, architecture, and other sciences. All right, it wasn't no sacrifice, human sacrifice. It was universities. All right, pay attention. It had been done elsewhere in the ancient world. For example, in 700 BC, the great astronomer Aratos was building spheres of stone and wood 10 feet in diameter to determine arc geometrical, in parentheses, values without the benefit of arc trigonometry. From his work involving experimentation with spheres and their latter use of teaching models, Aratos established the groundwork that would permit Eratosthenes to later reach an almost perfect description of the Earth's diameter. This knowledge and corresponding knowledge about the sun, moon, and star paths was immortalized in the image of Atlas holding the globe of the celestial vault on his back. All right, Atlas has one of these stone spheres. You see, that's what Atlas is carrying. Correspondingly, it is known that the Costa Rican water mirror, the device through which astronomers and their students sighted seen of stars and star pillars or columns, was symbolically held aloft by 4 Atlanteans, representing the 4 cardinal directions. David Lewis has shown that Polynesians had studied the stars, their pillars or columns, and their paths in an identical manner. Had correspondence been established between Greek astronomers and Mesoamerican astronomers? Between Mesoamericans and Polynesians? If navigational and astronomical knowledge and their symbolic representations existed in all 3 cultures, did it not confirm, or at least strongly suggest, navigational contact between these peoples? That's a great point, right? Why did these 3 cultures all contain myths of a golden age that perished in a great flood? The Greek gave the name Atlantic to the ocean outside the Pillars of Hercules, called Atlantis, the great empire of the Golden Age, and stressed the importance of Atlas, both the first king of Atlantis and the upholder of the heavens and the heavenly knowledge. Jet ATL, all right, listen to this. Jet ATL, right? Atlanta ATL is not even a syllable native to the Greek language. It is key syllable in the Nahuatl and Mayan languages of the Americas. All right, that's from us. Atlatang, Atzlang. In fact, ATL in Nahuatl means water, as well as the 9th of the 20-day names in the Nahuatl calendar. Atlahua, Atlahawa, Atlahawa was the name given to the patron of fishing among the Mexica. The Mexica, Moses, who established a capital on Lake Texcoco, now Mexico City. Atlahuac was the patron of that city-state canals, and gardens, and Atlantean was the name given to the giant figures regarded as the founders of Tula. All right, you hear this? This is our language, not Greek words. Ivor recalled a phrase Cyrus Gordon once used to describe the probable importance of ancient Central America. The Mediterranean is a sea that connected lands creatively. Middle America is a land that connected oceans creatively, okay? Oceans. Inspired by Gordon's words and recognizing the strategic position of Central America and what we had begun to perceive as a vast and ancient navigational region, Ivor now asks how far back in time these correspondences might have existed. The concept of Atlas supporting the earth, Poseidon's trident, celebration of twins, circular cities, and myths of destruction by inundation all went back to Plato's Atlantis. Remembering Plato's obsession with circles and his description of Atlantis' capital city, Poseidon, as circular and ringed with canals, Ivor studied the cities and constructions of ancient Mesoamerica. Almost without exception, they were circular and ringed with canals, encountering again Plato's description of the origins of the Atlantean people and their descent from 5 pairs of male twins. Ivor looked again at the use of twin motifs in the archaeological records of the Americas. It was there in profusion. Everywhere Ivor looked, from the Atlas figures holding up shallow water mirrors to the depiction of tridents, Poseidon's symbol, to the circular canal systems that ringed Cusco and other great American cities, the evidence of Atlantis as represented in the Americas is abundant, okay? It's abundant. Wake up. Was Atlantis what we now call the Americas? Plato and the Timaeus had described Atlantis as being larger than Asia, all right? Larger than Asia. It's not just a little island. The Greek definition basically included little more than what we now call Asia Minor and Libya. That's North Africa, all of Africa except Egypt combined, all right? So imagine what is bigger than all those places. Interpretations of the location of Atlantis have put in its various places in the North Sea, near the Canary Islands, in the Mediterranean, or in Antarctica. On size alone, among known bodies of land, it could not have been any of the first 3 possibilities, okay? It's not that big. They're not, those places that people tell me, no, it's in Morocco right there. It's in West Africa. That circle, you can see it from space. That's little. That's not bigger than Asia and Libya. That's just a colony of Atlantis. We went over there and colonized there, okay? But in Plato's description of a tropical paradise favored by the sun, Antarctica must be eliminated, so must any concept of a sunken region of the Atlantic plate. Tectonics simply do not show any gap in the coastlines of the Americas in opposition to Europe and Africa, except for a relatively small gap in the Caribbean region, nothing of the size of legendary Atlantis. And this gap can easily be explained by the shallow shoal waters of much of the Caribbean and the coast of Florida and Central America that once must have been part of the Atlantean continent before the floods and inundation that accompanied the end of the last ice ages. These lands were above ground and provide the fit to the tectonic puzzle. 11,500 years ago, most of the Great Bahamian Bank was exposed land. All right, listen to this. The Puerto Rican Plateau, including Virgin Islands, was a single landmass, okay? Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, that was all one land. Cuba and Florida were joined. Cuba was stuck to Florida. Listen, this is how the ancestors lived. As were Jamaica and Nicaragua. Listen, Jamaica, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica were right next to each other. Come on. Come on. And the shallow shoal waters of what are now the Windward Islands were possibly Plato's bare bones on a sunken continent, were part of an arching landmass with a few gorges connecting the Caribbean to the Atlantic. The Caribbean, greatly reduced in size from current dimensions, was almost a totally enclosed sea. Ivor's conclusion was that there could not have been a lost continent in the Atlantic Ocean, not of the size and scope Plato described. In fact, there didn't need to be a missing piece. America described Atlantis fully. You gotta understand, we're still here. The importance of Atlantis, of course, goes far beyond geographical or archaeological inquiry. Its importance goes to the heart of man's conscious purpose in the universe and to the essence of our relationship with the force that created the universe and made man the observer and measure thereof. If Atlantis was in the Americas, some vestige of cosmic awareness that constituted the heart of the last golden age should still be detectable, and it is. The evidence is that, despite a physical destruction of the center of Atlantis and the worldwide destructive activities of mankind, the principles on which Atlantis was founded have endured. After an age thousands of years in duration, in which enlightened man was reduced to a simple farmer, the germs of truth, cohesion with the galactic whole reasserted its purpose again in Mesoamerica, probably 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, with the concepts of the Golden Age intact. Flourishing again for millennia, it mysteriously self-destructed just several centuries before Columbus. Its record, however, was largely still intact when Columbus arrived in the New World, in parentheses. Traces of great navigational culture greeted Columbus at every turn. How could he have missed their implications? How could subsequent science and archaeology still dismiss the spheres as an out-of-context enigma? The evidence is far from complete, and looking back into the past, we can be sure that for every navigational find we have made, thousands remain undiscovered. Most will never be found, for decay and transformation are part of the immutable laws of nature. Pyramids endure, reed boats and cloud sails perish, yet evidence of ancient seafarers has been found, and this evidence has been systematically ignored. Iver confronted established science with his new perspective on the spheres in Costa Rica. They again responded that the spheres had been constructed by Chorotegas, the earliest known people of Costa Rica. Iver objected that the spheres had been found, even by traditional archaeologists, to be too sophisticated to have been built by any known cultures of the region. Iver insisted that they must relate to the oldest known culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmecs, and that they must date back to an age when megalithic structures were being built throughout the world. The establishment answer was, simply put, do not bother established theory with out-of-context information, in parentheses. Instead, Iver enlisted the aid of writer George Erickson. Together they began a determined search for mounting evidence that would upset accepted science and establish a new paradigm, one that would include the enigmas of the Americas.
You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. Looking for change, looking for pain, pulling a mob, pushing a train. I'll never stop, stick to a lane, pick up the pieces and go rearrange. I'll be the best above all the rest, put me to the test and expect nothing less. You check as I'm chess, what's happening next? Yeah. He got the venom, a tangible weapon, no coming in second. This life is a lesson. He got a new engine from pain, it's a blessing. New focus, no guessing, just bold and obsession. All in his possession, you got their attention. I'll leave an impression and take a redemption. Just kill no discretion. Your mind is a weapon. 11-11, it's time for progression. You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. People like sheep move feet, hurt it easy. You don't wanna be fast asleep when they scheming. Better stand tall, ready for a fight, believe me. When they try the chains, you can say no, free me. So he's been looking for somebody who could save him, instead of searching inside for what they gave him. A strong will, strong mind causes mayhem. We could change the world, change times, rearrange them. Staying on pace, running the race. Life is a chase, I don't want a place, I wanna be first. Work till it hurts, dehydrated thirst till I'm in a hearse. High ambitions and the right mind can take you so far. It's like you lived a few lifetimes. Take off from a break off from the weak minds. They can stay soft. You can change lives. You create thoughts. Never waste time. You got one shot. You got one life. Better pop off. What do you like? Make a dream job. No 9-5. No mean boss. Just my life and free thoughts. You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way. What I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. People like sheep move feet, hurt it easy. You don't wanna be fast asleep when they scheming. Better stand tall, ready for a fight, believe me. And when they try to change, you can say no, free me.